So we are super excited to have Phil Alloy on the One Goal podcast this afternoon. It's a bright, sunny afternoon. We're at our headquarters in Franklinton. We haven't done a podcast in the headquarters in a while. So Phil, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's a great privilege to be here and talk about Pelotonia and my experience with that.
Yeah. So I'm super excited to dive into your story. And, you and I met, and we can get into this a little later, but you and I met really through merchandise and sort of your jersey business as a vendor. But your merchandise sort of career started way before Pelotonia, and maybe touring with some fun bands and musicians and way back in the day. So tell me about that.
Right. I got involved in merchandising and tour merchandising. I worked with Bob Marley at one time, and we had the first license to do official Bob Marley merchandise. And we had a company that printed and sold Bob Marley merchandise in the United States and throughout the world. Yeah. And when he passed in 1981, we were approached by his company, Tough Gong Records, to provide tour support for Ziggy Marley and the Melody Makers. And we toured throughout the country with them a number of times, coast to coast, and it was quite an experience.
I bet. How did you end up with the Bob Marley license to begin with?
I had been traveling to Jamaica. I mean, this is a story unto its own, but I was involved with merchandising and T-shirt printing. And here I'm a guy in Ohio who says, I'm going to go to Jamaica and see if I can connect with Bob Marley. I mean, that's really what the idea was. It took a number of years and a lot of knocking on doors, but one day the door opened up and it happened. Yeah, and that's what it was.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure those stories are stories for another podcast.
Yes,
I'm sure. But when did cycling come into your life? And I know you've been cycling for a long time. When did that sort of become a hobby or a big interest of yours?
I've been a runner my whole life, but I got involved in cycling about 20 years ago when I moved to Columbus. I'd been doing the Bob Marley merchandising, and in the late 1980s, a group called GOBA, Great Ohio Bicycle Adventure, was being organized here in Columbus. And one of the organizers knew of this relationship I had with the Marleys and the merchandising, the mail order. And they approached me if I wanted to do the merchandising and the mail order.
The merch for GOBA.
For GOBA. And that's kind of how I transitioned from music into cycling and into the merchandising,
Did you ride and participate in that first GOBA that you supported?
Believe it or not, I've done 30 GOBAs as a merchandiser, and I probably haven't ridden 100 miles on it. I mean, I was there to the merchandising, and we did that.
Yeah. And did you get into sort of like GOBA and then toss serve is another one?
Yes, we've done toss serve. I've done Special Olympics. I've done collegiate cycling teams. I've done, of course, Pelotonia teams. But have been very involved. We also have a license to do Major Taylor, the historic African-American cyclist. We do all that merchandise. So been very privileged, and it's very nice to be able to do this stuff officially and be out there doing it. It's a great feeling.
We had a lot of our listeners will remember we did a episode with some of the OG founders of the Major Taylor Cycling Club, and that was one of those conversations that could have gone on all day and stories for days, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, of course, I'm in Major Taylor Cycling Club. I ride with all those guys, and I've been in the club 20 years, and I was one of the newer people in the club when I got involved.
Exactly. It's almost like you still might be one of the newer people only 20 years in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
As you think about cycling, and I'm always curious. Cycling's always means something to people, and there's a reason people like it. What do you like about cycling?
I like cycling to be able to get out, the freedom of cycling, and just to be able to get out in the motion. Again, I used to run, but you can go out and run for an hour, 90 minutes, and that's it. You can go out and cycle all day and run into people and be in nature and be by yourself.
And actually get somewhere, too. Running's kind of hard to actually travel somewhere.
Enjoy it. It's been, the first time I got on a bike was probably the last time I ran. It's just a wonderful experience. And whether you ride 10 miles or 100 miles makes no difference. It's just that freedom. And bicycles are kind of like time machines because everybody rode bikes as little kids, and it kind of almost takes you back to then again, that freedom and that release that you get from cycling. So it's a wonderful activity.
I totally agree. We were talking before we started the episode. I have a 3-year-old, and sort of I'm like in the prime time of teaching her how to ride a bike, and it's super challenging and like exciting to watch, and it's the childhood sort of freedom of being on your own bike and going fast and going somewhere is like, I've been thinking about that a lot recently, because when I go out and ride, it's the same thing. I can go a little farther than she can.
Exactly. You'll never forget the time you take the training wheels off and give her a push.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
She's on her own,
My goal is by the end of the summer, she's like the youngest one in the neighborhood actually riding. So we'll see if we get there.
She got a lot of inspiration from you, I'm sure.
Have you always lived in Columbus?
No, I'm originally from Toledo.
Okay.
I've been in Columbus about 20 years. And again, as I moved to Columbus, I got down here for a work opportunity, and I've been here ever since.
Yeah.
It's a great city. Obviously the cycling scene is wonderful with all the cycling paths, both on and off the road.
Yeah. And continues to grow too.
Yeah. It's just wonderful to see that.
Where did you sort of first encounter Pelotonia, and maybe it was just watching it from afar sort of grow, but then, you eventually, I think, met some pretty, legendary people in the community. Mike Perry, I know, was someone that you connected with early on. And how'd that all come about?
Well, Mike is really the person that really inspired me with Pelotonia. I was aware of what it was. Mike was running a series of indoor training, wintertime training. It was a local church or something. You could bring your bike and your indoor trainer and set up. And we were doing that. And at that time, I really didn't know about his relationship with Pelotonia. And of course, he runs Team COPC, which is one of the big independent teams, one of the most successful teams. And somewhere along the way, he mentioned that, he was looking for jerseys for his team, just in the course of conversation. I said, I have a company that makes jerseys. And he said, go ahead, make ours.
Yeah, make the COPC jersey.
Yeah, and we've done that. And he was so pleased. He said, you got to talk to Pelotonia. And he introduced me to you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how you and I met. And that's kind of how I got involved with Pelotonia, even though I'd been riding virtually. So I do have a number of years in that. But it was Mike who really got me into Pelotonia.
Yeah, Mike's a pretty amazing guy, and has, I think, really through Columbus Outdoor Pursuits, who supported GOBA and Toss Serve and all of that, and really, pioneering cycling organization in Central Ohio for sure. He was one of the ride leaders early on, and sort of got his training through Columbus Outdoor Pursuits, and has infused that into the Pelotonia community.
Yeah, he's a wonderful asset to Pelotonia and the cycling community.
Yeah.
So enthusiastic.
And the amount of people he's taught to ride safely is, he's left his mark for sure, which is
absolutely,
which is always appreciated. So let's talk about sort of, you had what I think is a really interesting health journey, over the last couple of years, and something that you and I have really gotten to connect on several times. But sort of take us back to the beginning when, maybe you weren't feeling so well and noticed something wasn't quite right.
Well, let's kind of get right into it. I'm a 2-time cancer survivor, and I'm a transplant recipient. In 2018, during a normal health checkup, they noticed a high blood protein that potentially indicated cancer, and they did some research. They found out.
So this was just from like a simple blood draw?
Right. That was the suspicion.
The
and then after they started looking, they determined I had hepatocellular carcinoma, which is liver cancer. They said it was...
What'd you think when they told you that? Do you remember where you were when someone told you that you had liver cancer?
It was pretty shocking, you know? In the sense is, fortunately, we were kind of ahead of it, that I didn't feel any ill effects.
Yeah.
So I really didn't know what was going on. And
so you felt fine generally.
Yeah. And it was like hitting the gut when they tell you something like that, something like, what? Mm-hmm. Because, I was out riding, I was doing it my normal living, and suddenly this comes.
Cancer, right?
But they told me, and I went through Ohio State, at the James, and they determined to do what was called a liver bisection, that the cancer was limited to a small portion of my liver, and they could take it out.
So you just take off part of the liver?
Right. They took off the tip end of the liver. They said they got it, but they cautioned me, if it returns, the only option you're going to have is a liver transplant.
Yeah.
Oof,
those are big words.
Yeah, that was something I couldn't even conceive at that point. Yeah. All that involved in. I was.
How long was that surgery into? Or I guess you had that blood draw where there was a questionable sort of level of protein or whatever that they investigated. From that point to being told you had cancer, to the surgery.
It was relatively quick. I'd say it's probably less than 3 months.
Okay.
I remember we were doing GOBA. I already knew what was going on, but I remember the surgery was just a week or two after GOBA 1 year. But I would say it was probably less than 3 months, because once they realized what was going on, they scheduled it.
Yeah.
There's no time to waste. And they did that. And, they monitored me every 6 months and every 3 months they monitored me with CT scans and all that. And everything went along very well until the following year. They said the cancer has returned.
This was 2019.
This was 2019.
Do you remember what month?
It was kind of in the fall, I recall.
2019.
Yeah, it was a little more than a year later.
So you have a checkup, and there it is again.
Yeah, I was, because they were monitoring me for the first, again, it was like every 90 days I would do a CT scan.
Yeah.
They said, it's back, and the response that I had to that compared to the first one was mega. Now
it's a gut punch.
Yeah, this is real serious. It took me a couple of weeks to really come to terms with what was going on, because even though they tell you can get a transplant, that doesn't mean you can get one. And plus you have to go through all the procedures, and it's not like they scheduled the liver bisection for a few weeks later. Transplants don't work that way.
Yeah, right.
You got to get on a list.
A lot of stars have to align.
Yeah, exactly. So, I was fortunate to get on the transplant list here at Ohio State. And as a backup, I also got on the list at Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
But it takes a minimum of 6 months after you're on the list before they will even consider you.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
I don't fully know how all that works.
Yeah, it's kind of I don't want to say a rating system, but, and you can't be, they monitored me to make sure it hadn't metastasized, because if it had gotten outside the liver, that's it, you're done. You know? So, I was constantly undergoing medical review. During that time, I would say it was well over a year later.
So this is so starting in the fall of 2019, where they told you cancer's back and next step's a transplant.
Mm-hmm.
From that minute, you're just sitting, waiting, going through that 6 month period, just waiting and waiting and waiting. And meanwhile, you're constantly getting checked up by the doctors.
Right. And even at the end of the 6 months period, when kind of you now begin to get to the point where they can consider you. You just have to sit and wait. There's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
6 months go by and you're still in a waiting mode. It's not like they can schedule something like a transplant. They just said, best thing you can do is keep a bag of your clothes in your car. So if we call you, you can just come.
Like a go bag.
Yeah, exactly. And never let your phone out of your reach, because you get the call. It could be day or night.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it was.
What was, fall 2019, cancer's back, told you need a transplant. I think everybody knows in March of 2020, the world changed quite a bit. And from a health standpoint, what was going through your mind with that, knowing you're trying to keep yourself as healthy as you possibly can to get this transplant that you need. And now we've got COVID showing up.
And I was obviously pretty much isolated myself to stay away from it. I still had to do work, income. Fortunately, the cancer had not attacked my liver to the point that it kind of made me sick or incapacitated me. I was able to lead a relatively normal life. And, one thing I continued to do all this time was continue cycling.
Yeah.
I was healthy enough to do that, not only for my mental fitness, but also they're talking an 8 or 10 hour operation to do this. And some of the tests they put you through was to see if you could even make it through the operation.
Oh, interesting. Like stress tests and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was determined I was training for the life or death Olympics is how I looked at it.
Yeah.
I was putting on, I'd go out and ride maybe 30 miles at a time because I couldn't get too far away from a car in case the call came while I was out riding.
Yeah.
So I couldn't go out and ride 100 miles or whatever.
Right.
I had to be close to a car at all times. But I was doing probably 100 miles a week, even into the winter.
Great. Yeah.
Because I wanted to be fit and ready to go.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting mindset training for the life or death Olympics.
That's how I looked at it.
What besides trying to, I mean, at the end of the day, getting a transplant's just a ton of stars have to align. It's a lot of luck too, right? And so I guess did it ever, you went all of 2020, sort of sitting and waiting, for this.
I started getting calls. I got a call from Ohio State. This would have had to been late summer. I remember I was in Clintonville and the call comes, and it's like, whoa, what am I doing now? And I had a friend who lived in the area. I parked my car there and they took me over to the hospital, and I thought, oh, here we go. And of course I called all my family and everybody's, at long last, all this, and I get there and it didn't work out.
Interesting.
Just
so
because
it just wasn't a match or there's
or there wouldn't have been viable necessarily.
Got it.
I went through this 4 times. And at one point it got to the point that I wasn't even calling anybody.
Yeah.
I said, I'm going to go, and if they tell me, I think
they tell you then you're good to go.
I think I even Ubered
people
over once, so I wouldn't leave my car there.
That must have been an interesting Uber ride.
Yeah. Where are you going? What are you going over there for?
Yeah, liver transplant.
Yeah. What? So it kind of got that way because mentally you have to begin to deal with it. Obviously the first time.
Right.
And then, every time you have to deal with it, your whole family, everybody's, on alert for that. And I just didn't want to continue to put everybody through that.
Yeah.
So each successive time, I think I told fewer and fewer people.
Yeah.
But there was a time they had me in the gown. They had me set to go in the operating room. I got that close, and they said, liver's not, whatever the reason, they don't necessarily give you the reason why.
Yeah.
And they pulled all the leads and everything out of me and said, go home.
Yeah.
So that was it. That took me through the end of 2020 4 times. I got called 4 times.
4 false alarms or non-matches. How discouraged were you by that 4th time?
I was hoping to have it done by the end of 2020. And again, you have no control over this.
Yeah, none.
I mean, right. It's just a hope, And yes, by the end of 2020, I was kind of discouraged, but I was still, fortunately, the cancer hadn't overtaken my liver, and I was leading a pretty normal life.
Yeah.
I just can't stress how blessed I was during all this, because as I've gone through, both at Ohio State and Cleveland Clinic, gone to some of these seminars with people, there's some really sick people there, And I was able to, walk in and walk out on my own and basically live a good life during all this. But, I'm always looking over the precipice. You never know when you're going to take that step over, because when the cancer is going to catch up to you. So
did you change sort of during that period? Did you change any of your behaviors or, we've talked, together offline just about cancer changes your perspective on a lot of things and how you value time with people and sort of all of that stuff. Were you starting to just change any behaviors or do anything different because of what you were experiencing?
Well, your thought process definitely goes through some revisions, because again, you never know, if get the transplant in time to save your life. And actually I was going through some treatment because the cancer was, active in my liver, and I was going through treatments here in Columbus to try and retard the development of the cancer, and very painful. And they told me, listen, this is not going to stop the cancer. All we're trying to do is keep you alive long enough to get a transplant. Yeah.
And so early 2021, you get another call.
Super Bowl Sunday.
It was Super Bowl Sunday. Who was in that Super Bowl? You remember?
I think that was the Patriots, and I don't recall. I lived a normal life.
I'm like so bad at remembering that kind of stuff. So
watched,
Super Bowl Sunday, you get a call.
I watched the game, went to bed. 1 o'clock in the morning, the phone rings. It's Cleveland Clinic. We have a liver available. Are you interested? Yes. Get in your car right now and head to Cleveland. 1 o'clock in the morning, I get in my car. Freezing cold night. I'll never remember how cold it was. Forget how cold it was. And drove up there. 4 o'clock.
Did you drive up by yourself?
I drove up by myself because, again, you never
were worried
know.
about the
Somebody, you could be halfway there and they could call and say, it's not working out.
Oh.
So worst case scenario, I'll park my car there, and they'll send me back. And I got there, and 4 o'clock in the morning, I get there, and they kind of set me up. And the next morning of February 8th, they took me in the operating room, and they said, the only way you know that this has been successful is when you wake up and they tell you you've had a liver transplant. And sure enough, that's what happened. My first memory of coming out of that, after being in a coma for 2 days, they put you in a coma.
They put you in a coma
for 2 days, and I had no idea of this until someone told me days later how long it had been. They wanted everything to kind of settle down.
Yeah.
I remember the nurse standing over me and saying, "Congratulations, you have a new liver." And it was just like.
Do you remember, I've had three pretty major surgeries, and I feel like I always remember wearing the gown, laying in the bed, getting wheeled into the operating room. You're chit-chatting with people, right? Like almost trying to calm your own nerves. Do you remember that moment before you sort of went under anesthesia?
It's interesting because there was a time, I remember getting to Cleveland Clinic, and I remember parking my car. And it was a few hours later when the surgery actually took place, and I'm completely blanked. I don't remember none of that, even though people said I called them and let them know what was going on.
You don't remember
I don't remember any of that, but I do remember being in the operating room, and they kind of wheel you in, and they want you to get on the operating table.
Yeah.
And they said you need to put something on your hair to cover your hair. And I remember that. That's it. And I remember waking up
2 days later
in ICU. I thought it was that afternoon. I had no idea. It had been 2 days. It wasn't until I talked to somebody and said, "No, it's Thursday." And I said, "What do you mean it's Thursday?"
Yeah. The Super Bowl was last night.
Right. I came here on Monday. I said, "Yeah, but no, they wanted your body to settle down and everything to kind of take." So I can't tell you what universes I visited during those times, but they were out there. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. What? So you wake up, nurse, doctor standing over you and giving you a thumbs up.
That was it. I was in ICU. I spent maybe 8 days in ICU, and then I went to regular hospital. And then I went into rehab. I was in Cleveland for 2 months, spent another week there after I was discharged in the hospital. My brother came in from California and helped, and my sister. Meanwhile, my wife was kind of getting the house prepped here for my return. I came back, and I took another probably 6 weeks. People stayed with me 24/7 because I couldn't even walk. They had to teach me how to walk again in rehab.
What was that due to? Is that just the severity of the surgery itself?
Well, first I was in a hospital bed for
you just laying
6
down,
weeks, and you just see your muscles atrophy in your skin. But mentally, it takes so much out of you. Because I remember when they took me into rehab, and again, this is probably 5 weeks after the surgery, they wanted me to do simple math problems, and I looked at those numbers, and the numbers had no meaning to me. I couldn't comprehend what they were asking me, and that was the scariest part of everything. Because I knew, well, these are numbers, but I don't know what 4 means, and I don't know how to do the subtraction. And there was a clock on the wall, and they asked me to draw the clock, and I couldn't align the numbers correctly, even though there was something to look at. That was really scary.
Oh, man.
This has mentally affected me because, verbally, I could talk and all that. But when it came down to that stuff, I think of everything. That scared me more than anything.
That's scary. Yeah. That's not something you think of.
No.
When you think of, you think of, major organ transplant as major, but I don't think anyone thinks of those ancillary sort of things that can happen around it.
They try and prep you, both. I went through the procedures here, the prep stuff here in Columbus and in Cleveland, but nothing can prep you for what's going on. There's just so much. For instance, while you're gone, who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to cut the grass? Who's going to do this who does this kind of stuff? You don't think of that. What's your day-to-day life, like, and suddenly you're taking out all that.
Man. So that was February 2021.
Yes.
When did you start feeling like yourself again?
Months later. On top of everything else, there was further complications. I had another big surgery at the end of 2021. So I was through it in 2021. I had to go back to Cleveland, and they opened me up on the same incision line and did some work because I had some complications. It wasn't life-threatening, but it needed to be done.
To be addressed. And
so I would say I probably spent 3 months of 2021 in the hospital and probably another 3 or 4 months recovering. Yeah. And all the time they told me or asked me when I was in the hospital, what are your goals for getting out? And I said, there are 3 goals. One is to kind of get back to normal like I was before, to be able to ride my bike and to walk my daughter down the aisle at her wedding. And I've accomplished 1. I've accomplished 2 riding my bike, and a week from tomorrow, I'm walking my daughter down the aisle, and I can't tell you what that means.
Yeah, that's going to be pretty special.
Yeah, it's going to be very special.
It's going to be really special.
To be able to do that.
So I'm curious, as we've known each other for a few years now, and just you seeing and being involved in Pelotonia, and as you think about Pelotonia this year, and you see people out cycling with their Pelotonia jerseys on, and you support some teams to help them with their Pelotonia jerseys. Like, what's that like now, being on the other side of this and seeing, our entire community gets behind Pelotonia and supports something that both you and I care deeply about, which is cancer research and survivorship and all of those things. What's that mean to you?
It's interesting seeing it from both sides, both as a participant, obviously as a vendor, but as a survivor. And in 2020, I wrote it after the first surgery, and at that point, Pelotonia provides survivors special jerseys that say, we're a survivor, and I was wearing mine, and I can't tell you the number of riders that came up and offered encouragement and were asking me about what I'd gone through, rode with me, and they kind of felt that they wanted to support me, and people along the way who, saw me as a survivor. And I kind of feel, all right, I've come through this, and there's other people who've probably had it much worse than me. Maybe help them a little bit, I think, because, I think I've made it, I think. But it was such an emotional experience to be able to participate in Pelotonia that way. I've ridden all around the U.S., I've ridden in other countries, but I've never had an experience like riding in Pelotonia. It was so life-affirming to be able to go out there, and the whole vibe and the energy that the community brings to this. And me as a survivor, one of, I don't know how many survivors ride, but
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, in some years we've had up to 800-900.
Yeah,
but then you include the volunteers and spectators. There's thousands of survivors out there during the weekend.
It's an incredible experience. I just can't emphasize, even put it in words what it means. And now getting ready to ride it again after this transplant brings a whole nother level into it. It's quite something.
Yeah. So what's your Pelotonia plan this year?
Actually, I belong to Major Taylor Cycling Club here in Columbus, and they're fielding a team. And, thank you for the support through Pelotonia. And we're going to be riding with them. We're doing the 57,
formerly known as the 50, that was actually 57 miles, but we're calling it actually what it is this year, so 57.
I'm really looking forward to that because, again, one of my big goals laying there in a hospital bed was being able to say I can ride again. And it took a good year before I was able to ride. I used to go by my bikes in the house and they go, Phil, what's going on here? Come on, ride us. Yeah. I couldn't do it. And the day I finally rode, it was probably in March. It was so emotional just to be able to get on a bike and ride it
Yeah.
and feel like, oh, I've accomplished that again. I'm kind of,
That's pretty amazing.
yeah,
Well,
it was.
I'm looking forward to seeing you out on the road this year and hopefully seeing you during ride weekend and repping that survivorship,
Yep.
the jersey, and this has just been an amazing story, and I'm super grateful for you just coming in and
Absolutely.
sharing it. And
It's been a great privilege, and I think one of the things I feel almost responsible for, having come through this twice, and with the transplant, and people sometimes approach me and they want to know a little bit about it, and I think sometimes they're a little hesitant or reticent. I am wide open. My story, I think, is so remarkable in a sense that I feel so blessed to be able to come through all this and essentially live a normal life. I mean, I can't even tell you what that means to me. And to be able to share that with people and, encourage people to, be involved in the Pelotonia, or just, if you know somebody in your family that has cancer. I've told people, if they want to talk to me, call me. My phone works 24/7.
Yep.
Believe me, I've been through the 24/7
You really
phone
have.
receipt calls. So no, I feel I have a responsibility to try and explain where I've been, where I'm going, and trying to encourage people. It's the least I can do for what I've been gifted here, and that's really what it's been.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Phil, thank you so much for sharing your story, and looking forward to sharing this with the whole community.
Quite welcome. Again, it's been my privilege, Joe. Thank you for inviting me. It means a lot.
Yeah, thank you.